We're going to start from 3b2. That's Daf Gimel Amud Base, and it's 2/3 of the way down the page. It's like 2, 4, 6, 7 lines down, 7 lines up from the big lines. The word starts with gufa. The word gufa is in the middle of the line, and in the art scroll it's 3b2 on the right column, which says gufa. So we're going to go back to elaborate on something that was already previously stated in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and this will begin a list of different teachings in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. As I mentioned before, this Gemara that we're learning is going to touch upon some halachas that are taught in this week's Pasha, in Pasha's Bahar. So let's get to it, and let's start. Okay, Gufa. Going back to the text of the ruling of Rabbi Shua ben Levi that we mentioned before in the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, Krach, a walled city, and everything that is near it, and everything that can be seen with it, is treated like a walled city. Okay? So now, Tana taught, when you say that a town is near a walled city, is treated like a walled city, that is not only when it is also seen, but even though it cannot be seen, so long as it at least has one of these characteristics, either close or can be seen, then it's considered part of the walled city. Furthermore, nira, if it can be seen, even though it is not near the city, in other words, it is far off, because it can be seen, it qualifies to be considered as part of the walled city. And what's the nafkamina? What is the difference? The practical difference is that you can read the Megillah on the 15th in those cities. Okay, so now the Gemara asks, so we understand a case of how you can have a city that, although it can be seen, it's not near. Right? Why? We can find such an occurrence when, for example, the town is situated on top of the mountain. So even though it's not near, but you can see it. But what is the case where you have a city that is near a walled city, right? But it cannot be seen. If it's near, it should be able to be seen. So how is it possible? How do we find such a situation? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, it's in a case where the town is situated in a valley, and so therefore, because it is in that valley, so if you're further, a bit higher up, you might not be able to notice the city, because when it's in that valley, it's not necessarily visible to everybody. So another teaching of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, if you had a city that was initially settled, meaning that houses were already built, and only afterwards, afterwards you surrounded it with a wall, so then Nidan Kikfar is going to be treated as a village, meaning an unwalled city. And what's going to happen is you do not read it on the 15th, but you read it on the 14th together with everybody else. Okay? That's what he says in terms of the laws of reading the Megillah, right? We want to know when you can read the Megillah. So if you have a city that first you had the houses built, and then you built up a wall around it, then you're still going to read it like everybody else on the 14th. Frank the Gemara, my time, but what's the reason? In other words, where do you learn this from, that it has to be particularly in that way? What's wrong if it's the other way around? What's wrong if I have a bunch of houses that are built and then we put up a wall around it? Why will that not qualify? See, if he says we learned this out from a pasuk, and this is the pasuk from Parshas Bahar. It says, Beis Moshav, if a man shall sell a house in a walled city, so we learned from this shehukaf that first it was surrounded, Yoshav, and then only afterwards it was settled. The loy and not Yoshav hukam. Not that at first it was settled and then surrounded with a wall. Now, in order to understand this properly and to better understand the laws surrounding this, that we're going to discuss, I just remembered that I didn't address something else. So let's address what I'm talking about now, and then I'll come back to the thing I wanted to address afterwards. We asked a question yesterday about a suffix mes mitzvah, so I looked it up and I came to the answer. But right now we're talking about something else, so let's finish what we're dealing with now, and then we'll go back to the other issue afterwards. Okay, in this week's Parsha, Parshas Bahar, if you turn to Leviticus chapter 25, verse 29. So it says as follows. There are laws with regards to the inheritance in the land of Israel. What happens in the land of Israel is like this. If a person, one second, let's have this up here. Okay. If a person owns property and he's going through a hard time and he decides that he wants to sell his property, so the answer is that he's allowed to sell that property. And after 2 years from that sale, when he makes enough money, or he has other people who want to help him out, he can purchase back that property from the person who he sold it to, and he has a right to do that. He has a right to buy it back because it's an ancestral homeland, and so therefore he has a right to buy it back. What happens if he's not able to afford to buy it back? Well, comes along Yovel, and this Yovel, the 50th year, the Jubilee year, that causes that all the lands, all the property goes back to its original owners, and it reverts back to him. That's the law. However, there is an exception to the law. There's an exception to the law. The exception to the law is a case in verse 29. And when a man sells a residential house in a walled city, its redemption may take place until the completion of the year of its sale. Its period of redemption shall be a full year, which means that you only have 12 months from the date of the sale to be able to buy it back. Once that date has passed, it now becomes, as we read in the next verse, in verse 30, but if it is not redeemed by the end of a complete year, then that house, which is in the city that has a wall, shall remain permanently the property of one who purchased it throughout his generation. In other words, it now becomes his permanently, and it will not leave his possession in the Jubilee. In other words, it does not go back to the original owner. It's a final sale. After the year, you cannot purchase it back. Okay. Now, what are we learning from the wording of this particular verse? So for that, I want to share with you the Malbim on this pasuk. And the Malbim says as follows. The Malbim says, V'ish ki yimkar beis moishav ir chayma. When a person will sell a residential home in a walled city, so he says, Toyar, Beis Moshav, this title, the words, putting them together, Beis Moshav, like a residential home, Loy Ba b'shum makom. You don't find it anywhere else in Tanakh. You never find the words Beis Moshav together. It's either a bias or a Moshav, but not a Beis Moshav. The stam bias, Yeshua, because anytime it says bias, that's something that you use as a residence. So why would I need to say Beis Moshav? So therefore, he says, because you put the words Beis Moshav together, Pirshu Chazal, so therefore Chazal teaches Shem Moshav Samuch El Ir Chayma. The word Moshav is considered to be juxtaposed next to Ir Chayma. The words Ir Chayma means a walled city. To teach me, it needs to be Shenis Yashem Be'esh Shahoya Ir Chayma, that the residential homes had to have been made as residents once it was already a walled city. Excuse me. And
the wall did not come before they settled.
Yeah.
One second. Nachamol. One second. He says again, Torah based Moshe leba b'shum makim. Right? It's not based Yeshua. So Pirush Chazal Moshe samuch el ir chayma. The reason why Moshe is next to the words ir chayma, tzorich shenisyashiv be'eis shahoyo ir chayma, loy shekotmo hachayma liyishuv ha'ir.
In other words, the wall can't exist before the people come and settle the city.
Okay, but that's not
In the first part, it's basically saying that the settlement and the wall have to be at the same time.
Right. 1 second. Okay. I'm going to leave this because that's not how I understood it before, and so now I'm a little bit stuck. Because if you go back to the Gemara, let's go back to the Gemara for a second. Stop the share for a minute. Let's go back to the Gemara. So what did we just say? We said Reb Shimon Levi says Korach for my time. What's the reason for the ruling that what the city has to be initially settled? That a city that was initially settled, meaning the houses were built and then it was surrounded, is treated like a village, meaning an unwalled city. What's the reason? He says, it says, if a man shall sell a residence house in a walled city, that teaches me shehukaf, that first it was surrounded, and then afterwards it was settled. Not first settled and then surrounded with a wall, which sounds to be different to what the Malvin was saying. So that's why I'm confused. I'm going to have to look at that again later. I'm sorry about that. I understood it perfectly before, and now I don't understand it. So this happens. It's to keep me humble. The Baruch Hashem. Okay. So the bottom line is like this. Let's go back to the psukim themselves, and let's look at the Rashis of the psukim, and then we're gonna continue in the Gemara. Okay, so let's look at the psukim. So it says like this. And when a man sells a residential house in a walled city, its redemption may take place until the completion of the year of its sale. Its period of redemption shall be a full year. So he says a residential house in a walled city, a house within a city, surrounded by a wall since the days of Yeshua ben Nun. Okay, so this is what's the law is, that the houses that were walled already by the time of Yeshua ben Nun, it's with regards to those houses. This law applies. Any other city, this law doesn't apply. Okay, this law doesn't apply. Which law? The law of being able to only have a year to buy it back. Okay, so let's skip the next Rashi. Let's go to the next pasuk. But if it is not redeemed by the end of a complete year, then the house which is in the city that has a wall shall remain permanently the property of the one who purchased it throughout his generations, shall not leave his possession in the Jubilee. So it says Rashi, then that house shall remain permanently, shall leave the jurisdiction of the seller and remain under the jurisdiction of the purchaser. Now here we have a Kriyan Ksiv, where it says Asher lo yichema. So it's written Lamed Aleph, which means not. But the way we read it according to the Kabbalah, the tradition is that we read it as loy, right? That's the kri. Loy means that it does have. So Rashi points this out, and he says that has a wall. It says asher loy chayma, which means that which has no wall. However, the tradition is that we read it as loy, meaning to him, or to it, meaning that the city does have a wall. So the rabbis of blessed memory said that the written version of this phrase, namely Be'ir Asher Lo Yichema, teaches us that even If the city does not have a wall, meaning right now, since it had one from the times of Yeshua ben Nun, so therefore the laws of our passage still apply to it. Since the word ir is grammatically feminine, Scripture should have used the word be'ir asher lo with a hey, which is feminine, to say that it has a wall. However, since loy had been written inside, in other words, in the text it says with an aleph, so therefore the rabbis said this word to be read according with the oral tradition as loy, because it matches to the pronunciation with law. But the bottom line is what we learn, what we see from here is that there's a drasha over here that purposely we have the word loy, that with regards to the city, that it had the house had a wall around the city, right? So even if it doesn't have it now, but so long as it had it in the time of Yeshua ben Nun, this still applies. Okay, let's go back to the Gemara. Okay, Reb Shua ben Levi. And Reb Shua ben Levi says, a city that does not have 10 batlanim, which means unoccupied men who are there, that are capable to make up a minyan in shul. Nidan kikfar, it's going to be treated like a village, which means to say that the halacha for them will be that they can come in early and make it the day to the Yom HaKnisa, the day of the gathering, and use that day in order to read the Megillah if they don't have Asar Batlanim. Frankly, Gemara, Ma'ikamash Malon. What is Reb Shua ben Levi coming to teach us? After all, Reb Shua ben Levi is an Amira, and Tanina, we've already learned this in a Mishnah in our Masechta, that it says in the Mishnah, Eza Ir Gedola, what is considered a large town, Kol Sheyesh Ba Asar Batlanim, in which there are 10 unoccupied men. Pachas Mekan Harzei Kvar. So any less than that is considered a village. So what did Reb Shua ben Levi come to tell me that Krach She'ein Ba'asar Batlanim, it's considered like a kvar? I'm saying that explicitly in the Mishnah. There must be a chiddush that Reb Shua ben Levi is trying to teach us. What is the chiddush? So the Gemara answers, Krach Yitzchok, it was necessary for Reb Shua ben Levi to tell us the case of a city. Why? That Alpha Gav Ba'alma, even if you have a very large city which has millions of people passing through it, right? You have from all over the world, right? And you could have within it 10 Batlanim who are coming here on business. And what you find with people who go on business is that they have more time to come to shul and to learn than when they're at home doing business. Why? Because usually when they're at home, they're buying and they're selling, right? So they're very occupied. But when they're on business, right, when they're traveling on business, so they're just really trying to find merchandise to buy, but there are only certain times that they can go, and the rest of the time they're in shul, in which case you would think that in such a case, if you have a big city like that, so then we're not going to make this extra leniency for that city to be able to come in earlier to a city that has Asar Batlanim to be able to hear the Megillah, because surely among the millions of people that are coming there, they'll find at least Asar Batlanim. So we say that's what Reb Shua ben Levi is coming to teach us, that even though you might have 10 Batlanim from elsewhere, if they're not living in the city, then it's not considered it's considered still like a village, and the law of coming in earlier would still apply. Another teaching of Reb Shua ben Levi says, a city that was destroyed and then subsequently it was settled, then it's treated like a city. So now the Gemara wants to know, what do you mean when you say that it was destroyed? My charav. What do you mean by destroyed? If you're going to say that its walls were destroyed, so then Rabbi Shua ben Levi's teaching seemingly doesn't make sense, because when Rabbi Shua ben Levi says Yashav in, that if they went back and they subsequently rebuilt the walls, they settled it and rebuilt the walls, then it is given a status of a walled city. Lo Yashav loy, but if it's not settled, meaning the walls were not rebuilt, then it is not given a status of a walled city. But didn't we already learn that Rabbi Eliezer Bar Yesi taught and said that Asher loy chayma, in the pasuk that we mentioned above from Parashat Bahar, it says Asher loy chayma, that has not a wall, right? And we say Afapi, we learn from this the fact that it is written with a lamed and an aleph, and it is read as lamed with a vav, right? So therefore, it teaches me that Afapi Eloi Akshav, even though it doesn't have a wall now, but as long as it had one previously, meaning in the times of Rabbi Shimon Nun, it's considered like a walled city. So this teaching of Rabbi Shimon Levi doesn't really fit, because Rabbi Shimon Levi makes a prerequisite that it has to be built up in order to be able to consider it to be a city and to read on the 15th, right? So what does it mean that only if you built it back up? Ella, rather what you have to say is not that it's physically destroyed and physically rebuilt, meaning the walls were once then destroyed and then once and built up again. Rather, Ella, rather you're going to say, my chorav, what does it mean destroyed? That it was destroyed of its 10 unoccupied men. It means that people moved away, or whatever the case was, they lost their Asor Batlanim, in which case it now had the leniency applied to it that it could go and come into its town earlier to hear the Megillah. Once it gets back its 10 Batlanim, then we say it once again receives the categorization and the appellation of a city, and so therefore that leniency will no longer apply to it. Rabbi Shimon Levi, another teaching of Rabbi Shimon Levi, says, and here we go over to Daf Daled Amud Aleph 4a, Lud v'Oinai v'Gei HaCharoshim, these three cities, Lod, Oinai, and Gei HaCharoshim, b'Kof v'Schema Mimos Yeshua ben Nun Hama, that Rabbi Shimon Levi had a tradition that says that these particular cities, these three cities, were surrounded by walls in the times of Yeshua ben Nun, and therefore they could read the Megillah on the 15th. That's a Kabbalah that he had from his teachers. Like the Gemara, V'hani Yeshua ben Nuni, did Yeshua build these cities? In other words, we're asking, were these cities even in existence in the time of Yeshua? How could you have a tradition? How could you, Rabbi Shimon Levi, have a tradition that these were surrounded by walls in the time of Yeshua ben Nun if we're not even sure that they existed? Why are we not sure that they existed? We're not sure that they existed because in Divrei Hayamim it tells us that these cities were built by the sons of Elpal. So as it says, Elpal Beloni, Elpal built them up. The Chsiva says in Divrei Hayamim, Ovnei Elpal, Ever, Misham, Veshamed, that the sons of Elpal were Ever, Misham, and Shamed, and then it goes on to say, Hu Bana es Oilai Veslein Obresel. He built Oilai and Lod and its dependencies. So therefore, it seems that these cities weren't even around in the time of Yeshua ben Nun. So how can you say, that based on your tradition, they were walled cities in the time of Yeshua ben Nun? So the Gemara says that, listen, you're coming along and you're saying, since there's a verse in Tanakh that says that a city was built by so and so, you assume that it prior did not exist and only then was it built. Then I'm going to have a question for you if you're going to take that premise and ask you about other cases in the Tanakh where it says that so and so built a particular city, and yet we know that it wasn't built by him, it was built a lot earlier or a lot later. Well, according to your premise that these cities could not have been in existence in the time of Elpal, so then Asana Benonhu, then it wasn't really Elpal who built them, right? But rather it was who? It was King Asa who lived much later, right? Why? Because in Divrei Hayamim base it says Tichsiv Vayiven Asa es Ori Haptzurais Asher Yehuda, that Asa built 45 fortified cities which are to Yehuda, and at that time, at the time of King Asa, the land of Binyamin was under the rule of Yehuda. And when he went to build up all these cities, it was told that he actually went to build the cities of Binyamin as well, as it says in Divrei Hayamim base. So rather, you have to understand what happened with these cities is as follows. Rabbi Elazar said, Hani, these cities, these were in Havu. They were in fact surrounded by walls in the times of Yeshua ben Nun. But what happened? There was a terrible story in the history of the Jewish people, one of the worst of our history. This was a story with Pelegesh Begiva, and there was a civil war, and over 500,000 people were killed in a very, very short period of time. Jews killing Jews. It was a terrible episode because of what happened in Giva with the concubine and the way she was
dismembered.
Dismembered was what the husband did later on. But
Right.
but what happened was that she
The
was
way
The way she was treated earlier.
right, the way she was treated earlier. The way she was raped a whole night and left at the doorstep in the morning. So that's when he dismembered her and sent it around. Anyway, so there was a whole terrible thing that happened back then. So as a result of this massive war, we read in Shoftim that what happened was that they burnt down the cities as well. If you look in Rashi. That the Jewish people destroyed Binyamin and its cities. It says, "Gam kol ha'orim hanim tzois sholchu ba'esh." They put them up on fire. So that's what happened. Even though these cities did have walls in the time of Yeshua ben Nun, later on in the time of Pelegesh Begiva, so that's when those walls came down. But also El Pal Bilonhi, and then El Pal came and he tried to rebuild them, and he did rebuild them. But Hodor Inpil, then those walls eventually came down again, and so also Shaptzinu. Then again they fell. When they fell again, so also came and he restored them. And so even though it says that it was built by El Pal, and even though it says it was that it was fortified by King Asa. Nevertheless, what it means over there is that when they fell, they were rebuilt again, and when it fell again, it was fortified again, restored by Asa. But not that they didn't exist in the time of Reb Shua ben Nun. And a proof for this is from the psukim themselves, from the verses themselves. It seems logical to say that that's exactly what happened. Daikanami, because we could the precise reading of the verses will bear this out as well. The Chsiv says in the pasuk, by Yoimel Yehuda, and he said, Asa said to Yehuda, Nivne es ha'orim eile, let us build these cities. When you say let us build these cities, miklal da'orim hava mikara, so that implies that they were cities already. In other words, if I don't say let's build these cities, right, if they don't exist, right? I'm saying build these cities, it means, Shema Mino, we learn from here that these cities were already built, and here he just came to restore them. Now we come to another shtickle Gemara, right? Another teaching of Reb Shua ben Levi, which deals with laws with regards to the reading of the Megillah. But before we get there, I wanted to clear up something from yesterday that was left over. So let me just share this with you. 1 second. We were asked yesterday, what happens if a kohen comes along and he finds a mes mitzvah, he finds a corpse lying in a field or lying on the street, and we don't know whether he's a Jew or a non-Jew. So I looked it up in Shulchan Aruch, and Shulchan Aruch tells us what to do. It says like this: who is regarded a corpse? What's considered meaning a mes mitzvah, right? So he says one who he found on the road or in a town of heathens, and there's no one available to bury him. And from the spot where he found him, he could have called upon an Israelite to answer him and come to attend him and bury him. So the law is that he is forbidden to depart therefrom and leave the corpse, even to go to the town in order to fetch people to attend the burial rites, but he should defile himself for him and bury him. So here we're talking about a case where we know that this was a Jew, but you're in a town where there's nowhere to be able to get Yidden right nearby to help you to bury him. So therefore, your mitzvah is to, because you're the only one, to come along and bury him, even though you're a kohen. But if there were Israelites available in the proximity of the spot of the corpse, so that if the one who finds him would call upon them, they would answer him and come and bury him, such a one is not regarded a corpse whose burial is a religious duty, in other words, a mes mitzvah, for whom the kohen should defile himself. That's not because you have other Israelites around them to do it, but he calls upon them and they bury him. Now, if the townspeople came, then the law is that if his needs are adequately attended to, then you withdraw himself, and then you don't matami yourself. You leave it to the others to matami themselves. Some say, so this is just a horror. Some say that if he's not able to secure people unless he pays for them, then he doesn't have to pay the money from his own pocket. He can go and be matami himself. The kohen can be matami himself because it's still considered mitzvah if you can't find anybody to do the mitzvah. Now, here's the point that was in question. In the case of a corpse that is found, and we do not know whether he's a Gentile or an Israelite, so he says we decide according to the majority of those present there. In other words, you go after the right, you go after the majority. If the majority people are Jews living in that proximity, then we say that it's a Jew. If the majority are Goyim, then we go according to the majority and we say it's Goyim. Unless we can apply the principle that everything which is stationary is regarded as half to half. So this is a complicated principle in halacha, that when you have something which is kavua, it's considered mechsa k'mechsa. When do we say something is, we go after the roiv? When the thing is moving. But if something is stationary, then we say, since it is stationary, we do not come along and apply the principle of going after the majority, but we consider it as half-half. And since we consider it half-half, therefore, in the case of kohen, right, we would go with the more stringent view, and the more stringent view is that he would not be able to be matam himself. But it seems over here that if you are in a city where the majority are clearly mostly Jews, then even though you can't recognize him, you would bury him. But if not, then we don't. With regards to what to do in practice, call your local competent Orthodox rabbi. This is just for limud ba'alma, just for studying's sake. But so that's the answer to the question. Yes,
Rabbi, what's the footnote that says on the footnote there? I think it's footnote number 15.
The footnote 15. Footnote 15.
There's no word there.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll share it. 1 second. Footnote 15 says as follows. Footnote 15 says, this is from the Yerushalmi Sanhedrin. It says, one who's found slain between Tiberia and Tzipori is presumed to be a Jew. We decide according to the majority of the passers-by who are likely to frequent that spot, or the majority of the surrounding cities. If the majority consists of heathens, the kohen is not duty bound to bury him. Majority consists of Israelites. The corpse is regarded as one whose burial is a religious duty. We do not decide on the grounds of the nearer city, even if the nearness of that city shows evidence for such a decision, but we follow the majority. Why? Well, whatever comes out of a mixed multitude is presumed to have come from the majority. That means called the parish. Rubicon parish, that when we say something has separated itself, we assume, we apply to it that it has come from the majority, and so therefore it has the legal status of the majority, and so therefore we would say it's going to be considered to be a Yid, a Jew.
I don't mean the words that are following that. I mean the footnote itself. It says footnote 15. It must refer to something lower on the page. If you click on the word, if you click on the 15, I think it refers to something else.
This 15?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you watch the screen carefully, I click it, and what I just read came up. If I click it again, it disappears.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
So that's what it says. Okay.
Can a question in the middle of this, if I may?
Absolutely.
What is this the time when Jews had to be buried in sanctified land versus non-sanctified? Is that part of the equation that we deal with?
Well, the truth is, right, any land can be made as a burial place suitable for a Jew, right? It's just that, meaning to say, like, if somebody wants to be buried on their property, technically, you could be buried on your property. And we have, some instances where the only person buried in that particular area is one tzaddik, and there's no one else, right?
Correct.
So that's possible. Here, the idea is that he should be buried by Jews. That's the main thing. The most important thing is that he should be buried by Jews and get a proper Jewish.
And it's right then, right, because it's his right to have a religious burial.
That's
Other
correct.
than, okay.
That's correct.
But there is a process whereby that land is designated as
That's
being,
correct.
again,
That's
sanctified for a Jewish burial. That's, I guess, what I'm asking. Yeah.
That is correct. In
Okay.
fact, it's interesting because I'm a Kohen, and when I was in Sydney as a rabbi, so from time to time I was asked to do a funeral, and it's not so simple for me to do a funeral because when you're a Kohen, how do you do a funeral? You can't.
You get challenges. Yeah.
So what I would do is, if I knew that the cemetery was a new cemetery and there was plenty of free space around it, so that I could go and stand more than Daled Amos away from the grave, and I could access it without trees and this and the other, then I would agree to do the funeral. And I did a number like that. But one particular one that I did that stands out in my memory is where the community in Sydney had just consecrated a brand new cemetery, a brand new section to be a Jewish section, and I got to do the first funeral for that Beis HaKvaros, for that cemetery, and so there was no problem for me to access it. There were no other graves there. And I was the one to bury the first one, which was an experience because which way do you bury him? And there were a lot of questions. I needed a lot of guidance when it came to that first burial. But anyway, be that as it may, there you have it. I was able to do quite a number of funerals in my lifetime, and look, it's a challenge for Rabbanim who are Kohanim. What do you do? Somebody in your community passes away, unfortunately, and the family expects that you to be there, to be present, because that's what the rabbi does: hatch, match, and dispatch. Right? So you've got to be there for all of the life cycle events. But there were times where I had to decline because I couldn't do it because it was in an old cemetery, and in the old cemetery where it was impossible to get there. It was impossible to get between the graves to come and do it. So I had to get another rabbi to stand in my place. Obviously I went to the Shiva house and everything else, but I couldn't go and do the funeral. Anyway.
So you just have to be 6 feet away, Daled Amos away, and then you're okay.
Yes, and you've got to make sure that there's nothing serving as an ohel,
ohel.
Yeah, because that then it's considered as if you're still within that proximity, even though even going into the chapel is a problem, because when they have the Chevra Kadisha, right? So if they don't have a separate room for the Kohanim, which they usually do, right? If you don't have a separate room, you're not allowed to be in the same building, right? You're not allowed to be in the same building as this corpse. So most places, what they have is they have a small space between the room of the Kohanim, which goes all the way up to the heavens, right? That is, so it's completely separate from the actual building, and the Kohanim would have the doors open. And that way people can see them, or at least part of the people can see them, and they can see other people.
eBay.
Put them back. So that's that. All right, back to the Gemara.
My question was only, you say you go Achaharov, you go after the majority.
Yes.
Does the fact that the mace has a siman of whether or not he's Jewish on him make a difference? A Jew would have a bris. The question is that a consideration?
The question is, what about the Arabs? I mean, the Arabs also have a bris. If you're talking about Eretz
I
Yisrael,
understand, but what about somebody that doesn't?
Well, if somebody doesn't have a bris, then I'm assuming that would be
Jews.
Okay. So with Russian Jews, that's not a big question. That's not a big question.
There are
Well, you
Jews
still
that
go
don't.
Achaharov. That's all I'm asking.
So when it says to go Achaharov, it means that the presumption is that if you find a corpse, it's going to be one of the people who are of the majority. If they're Jews, whether he's circumcised or not, we're going to assume that he's Jewish, because that's what it means.
So if you go into Borough Park and you find a mace without a bris,
You have to
give
assume
him a Jewish funeral?
If he's from if the majority of people living that, it seems from the halacha, the answer would be yes.
All right, that's all I'm asking.
It seems that the answer would be yes. And again, you're talking about a very far off case where there's no one to actually deal with the burial, and it's up to you to decide. That Anyway, and today, and
I was just wondering whether or not you count Simonim or not. That's all.
it doesn't say anything explicitly in the halachas that I looked up, but I can. I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look into it further. It's an interesting question. What happens if you have some money? Does that count? Does that count? Does that count to deciding whether to just go along with this principle of the majority, or does that change? Does that change anything?
Right.
Good question. It's a good question. Okay. Greg, so where are we up to? Okay, so we said. Levi. Okay, now we're moving on to a new thing. Rabbi Shimon Levi taught another teaching. We are on Daf Daled Amud Aleph 4A1 on the right column of the art scroll. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, Noshim chayovis b'mikra Megillah, that women are obligated in the reading of the Megillah. Why? Because they too were involved in that miracle. And now, what does it mean that they too were involved in that miracle? There's two ways to understand this. One way to understand this is that the Gzera of Haman to kill them was to kill everyone, the men, women, and children. So therefore, the women were part of the Gzera, so they were saved. Others understand it that not just they were part of the Gzera and they were saved from that, but rather when we think about who brought about the miracle, it was Esther. So Esther was a woman, and she was, integral to the nest. She brought about the nest that came about. So therefore, women should also be obligated to be part of hearing the Megillah and celebrating and publicizing the miracle. So that's teaching, and there's a whole discussion whether women can read the Megillah or not. And it seems that they can read it for themselves. And there's a machlekes whether they can read it to be, you might say, men, because the question is whether they are obligated to read the Megillah or they're obligated just to hear the Megillah. If they're obligated to read the Megillah, then the principle is that anything that a woman is obligated in, just as a man is obligated in, then the woman can be mitzvah the man as well, because a person who is obligated in something can exempt other people from their obligation by doing it for them, right? Making a bracha and so on. Right, but if we say that the woman is only obligated to hear it, but not obligated to read it, then who says she can be mitzvah others? And that's why the Bahag rules that they can't. Others disagree and say that they can. It's a whole big discussion, and it's very relevant today because places where I've been the rabbi, in Toronto this was an issue, and I know in Sydney there were issues where there are groups within the Orthodox community that want equality, and want women to be able to read the Megillah, and this is a heavy issue, a heavy topic, and there are people that will specifically make their own minyan to be able to give women an opportunity to be able to get up and read the Megillah and take a leadership position, but it's clear that not everybody holds that it's okay. Some people do hold and some people don't hold. But like I said about the other thing, call your local competent Orthodox rabbi as to what you should do yourself. Okay, moving on to the next teaching. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, Purim Shecholi is b'Shabbos. What happens if Purim falls out on a Shabbos? And we said in our Mishnah that we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos. We haven't explained why yet. We will explain that later in the Gemara, why we don't read it on Shabbos, right? But the question is whether or not on that day, on that Shabbos, do we or do we not discuss and hold lectures on the subject of Purim when it falls out on Shabbos? So Rabbi Shimon Levi's teaching is that we do go ahead and we teach in Yonim of Purim, we expound on the Megillah and we teach things that are related to the day, even though it's Shabbos itself. Right? The Gemara, my Iyar Purim. Well, why would Rabbi Shimon Levi specifically mention Purim? What's so special about Purim that you have to mention it separate from all the other Yom Tovim? Why? What's the question? Afilu Yom Tov Nami. This applies to Yom Tov as well. That one would teach about it on the day of Yom Tov itself. The Tanya, as it's taught in the Brisa, Sheyiyu Shoylin V'Darshim Ben Yonishal Yaim. That when it comes to inquiring into and holding lectures on the subject of the matter of the day, Hilchos Pesach b'Pesach, the laws of Pesach should be taught on Pesach itself. Hilchos Atzeres b'Atzeres, the laws of Shavuos should be taught on Shavuos. Hilchos Chag b'Chag, and the laws of Sukkot should be taught on Sukkot. So why are you mentioning to me that when Purim falls out on Shabbos, that on the day of Purim itself, you should teach and expound upon the day, in Yonim, the ideas, the teachings that relate to that day? Yes.
Right. I think you skipped a few lines.
Did I?
Yeah.
Again, my Iyar Purim.
No, the Tanya Moshe Tiken.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
From
You're
there.
right. You're right. The Tanya, as it's taught in the Brisa, Moshe Ticket Levli saw that Moshe established for the Jewish people that they should inquire into and hold lectures on the subject of the matter of the day. So Hilchos Pesach, the laws of Pesach and Pesach, and Hilchos Atzeres b'Atzeres, the laws of Shavuos and Shavuos, and Hilchos Chag b'Chag, and the laws of Sukkos and Sukkos. So since we already have this Brisa that tells us that on every Yom Tov you should expound and should teach about the laws and about the matters that relate to that day. So why would Purim be any different that we would need Rabbi Shimon Levi to make this special teaching? And for the Gemara, so the Gemara says that the answer is Purim Yitzchok lei. The Purim, you needed Rabbi Shimon Levi to teach this. Why? As follows. Mahu d'seiva. I might have thought the Gzabashum the Rabbah that we should make a special gezerah because of the gezerah that was made by Rabbah. What's the gezerah of Rabbah? The gezerah of Rabbah is like this. With regards to certain laws, when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, when it comes to Sukkot, when it comes to Purim, there are certain things that it's not very common to do, like blowing the shofar, shaking the lulav, reading the Megillah. So we're worried that a person might, when they want to fulfill the mitzvah, run in the street and take their shofar to the rabbi so that the rabbi should teach them how to blow the shofar. But forgetting that it is Shabbos, they'll be carrying in the street when it's forbidden to carry in the street. If there's no Eruv, you can't carry in the street. And because we're worried about somebody carrying in the street, so therefore Rabbah got up and made a gzera and said that when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, you're not allowed to blow the shofar on Shabbos. When Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, only in the Beis Hamikdash would they take the lulav and esrog on Shabbos, but everywhere else you would not shake the lulav on Shabbos. And likewise, with regards to reading the Megillah, because we're worried about people coming to carry, there's no reading the Megillah on Shabbos. So the question is, if I'm going to allow you to start expounding and teaching on the laws of the Megillah and teaching about the Megillah on Shabbos, perhaps we should also extend this gezerah of Rabbah to this as well. So therefore, the teaching of Rabbi Shimon Levi is to tell me that the gezerah of Rabbah only applies to reading the Megillah on Shabbos, but not to teaching and expounding on the Megillah in shul by the rabbi on Shabbos when it falls out on Purim. That's why we need that halacha. Okay. Next teaching of Rabbi Shimon Levi. Sorry, just 1 second. Once I mentioned the shofar, I have to blow my shofar. Okay. Rabbi Shimon Levi. Rabbi Shimon Levi says another teaching. One is obligated to read the Megillah on the night of Purim. And not just that, and to, well, we're going to have a discussion on what Velishneisa means, but let's just read it as the article translates it, to repeat it on the day of Purim, which means to read the Megillah twice. Where do we know this from? Shenema, like it says in chapter 22 of Tehillim. Chapter 22, we're told by Chazal, is a reference at the beginning to Esther. So it says in Kapitel Chav Beis of Tehillim, Elikai ekro yoimam v'lo isaneh v'layla v'lo yidum yali. It says, oh my God, I call out by day, and you do not answer by night, and there's no respite for me. So we learn from here that that the time of them calling out to Hashem was by night, right, and by day, and so therefore the reading of the Megillah, which was a nes, should be both by night and by day. So now, when the people in the Beis Medrash heard this teaching from that in the name of Rabbi Shimon Levi, Sovereign, they understood it to mean when it says that Chaim Adam Likris is a Megillah Balayla, when it says a person has to read the Megillah by night, Lemikraya Balayla, that to read the Megillah was by night. But when it says Velishnoisa Bayayim, they thought it meant you should learn the Mishnayos of Tractate Megillah by day. That's how they understood this statement. So Amalahu Rabbi Yirmiyah said to them, Lididi, to me, Mefarsha li minei de Rabbi Chia bar Abba. I have been explained this by Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and he explains that Rabbi Shimon Levi didn't mean that you're supposed to read the Megillah by night and then learn Tractate Megillah of the Mishnayos by day, but rather it means to repeat it. Like people would say, Evo Parsha. So I'll finish the section. I'll finish this section. And I will then repeat it. I will go over it again. Itmanami, we see this was also stated by a different Amayra, quoting a different pasuk. Rabbi Chelboy, Ula Bira. So Rabbi Chelboy said in the name of Ula from a place called Biri, that Chayim Odom Likris es Megillah Balayla. A person is obligated to read the Megillah on the night of Purim, Velishnoisa by Yom, and to repeat it by day. From where do we know this? Shenema, like it says in the pasuk, Man yizamercha haved v'lo yidayim shem elikai lo ilamideka. It says, so my soul might sing to you and not be stilled. Hashem, my God, forever I will thank you. So what do we have over here? We have Lamad yizamercha haved. When is the time when we sing praises? The time of Hallel is not usually by night, it's usually by day. Hallel v'yidah is usually by day. V'lo yidayim, we interpret to mean that it's I will not sleep. I will not sleep even by night, which means to say I will read the Megillah both by day and by night. That's the way we understand. We understand this. Says, if you look at the last Rashi on the page, I will sing to praise to you, to your glory in the day, and I won't be quiet balayla at night. This pasuk from Mizbah Arimimcha Hashem Kidili Sani Darshina. We learn this out from this is Kapitel Lamed, chapter 30 of Tehillim. Bepsikta, we learn that in the Psikta that B'Mordechai Esther V'Haman V'Achashverosh who creates a Megillah. With regards to Mordechai, Esther, Haman, and Achashverosh, and the reading of the Megillah, Shevachu, it's a praise to Hashem. Shemafarsim Mesanes, we publicize the Nes, Ba'akol Mekalsin LaKadosh Baruch Hu, and everybody begins to praise Hashem. Okay, so that's the end of this Shtickle Gemara. Everybody okay?
Great.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Let's go a bit further. Now, the Gemara quotes from the Mishnah, we said like this. We said, we said that with regards to the residents that live in the villages, they can bring the time early of the reading the Megillah to what? To the day of the assembly. So now we want to explore what's the reason for this. Reb Chanina said the reason for it is the Chachamim wanted to make this leniency for the people in the villages. What for? To bring it forward to advance the date to the time of the assembly. In order so they will be available on the 14th of Adar to provide water and food for Purim feasts for their brethren who live in the towns. So if that's the real reason, and here we go over to Davdala Daman Base, Lememra. Does that mean to say to Takana, the Krachin Hava? Are we to say that this dispensation is made for the benefit of the towns? If that's the case, well, Tanan, did we learn further in the Mishnah that Choli is Basheni? If the 14th day of Adar falls on a Monday, Kfarim Bayaris Gedelis Kerim Bebayayin. The residents of the village and the large towns, they read on that day. But now, Ve'im Isa, if we're going to say that the whole purpose is to make it easier for the people of these villages, so then let them not have to do it on the 14th day itself, but the Likadmu Liyamaknisa, let them bring it earlier to the Thursday before, right? In other words, if the whole purpose of telling people they can come earlier is to make life easier for them, so then why is it only on when Purim doesn't fall out on the day of Yom Knisa, a day of gathering, that you make this leniency and you tell them to come the day earlier? Why not do that even if Purim falls out on a day on a Yom Knisa, in order to help them to be able to provide with water and food for all their brothers in that city? Let them come in to hear the Megillah the Thursday before so that they can enjoy Purim at home. That's the question of the Gemara. Let them bring it earlier to the Thursday before. And for the Gemara, you're going to have a problem. The problem is, if you count, right? If Monday's the 14th, if you go back to Thursday, Thursday's going to be the 10th. But if you look at the Mishnah, the rabbis never made a dispensation to go all the way back to 10. It was only up till 11, right? Remember, the Megillah Nikras, the Megillah is read from the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, right? That's it. There's no going past the 11th. So therefore, you couldn't come along and bring it to the Thursday before. So let's stop here, because otherwise,
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I'm looking at the Steinsaltz Gemara, and on the pasuk from Tehillim, which you were saying, 30, where it says, "I will give thanks to you forever," and it's regarding both by day and by night.
Yeah.
So he has a footnote there that says the Maharsha adds that the closing words of the pasuk, "I will give thanks to you forever," alludes to the holiday of Purim, because of the words of the Talmud Yerushalmi state that the days of Purim will exist and will not be annulled even in the world to come.
Absolutely, yes. That is correct. Thank you for sharing that. All right, everybody, have a wonderful day, and we will continue from here. Yes.
Rabbi, question. Okay, so I thought that the reason why you would do this, not so much the water and things like that, but the fact that that you do it as a way of showing more honor for Hashem by having a larger group. And that's the reason why they were brought. It was either moved back to a Thursday when you would normally read the Torah, and so everybody would be there, or on Monday again because you would read the Torah. So,
there are a number of reasons that are advanced as to why we do that. We're exploring one at a time. So we're looking at the one that was just presented by Reb Chanina. Reb Chanina presents one particular reason, but it's not the only reason that we accept for the reason why we bring it earlier. Generally, the most practical reason is because there's no one there to read it for them. That's the most practical reason. But the Rev Hadras Melech is also another reason. No question. It's another reason.
But I also, Gemara mentions, there's nothing to do with because you're reading the Torah by a minyan. It's because these are the market days that everybody came in, men, women, children, to listen to the Megillah. It was a market day, so they were coming into town anyway. It had nothing to do with Kriyas HaTorah at Shabbos.
But that's the reason why you did it as well. I mean, why you read the Sefer Torah at that time, because everybody was coming in.
Right.
So therefore you could do it, Be'of Ha'am Hadat HaMelech.
That's separate. That's why you don't have 10 separate, you're not supposed to have 10 separate minyanim.
Right. That's correct. Yeah, so there definitely is that element, but we're not mentioning that right now because we're looking at each one individually. We're exploring right now Reb Chanina's explanation about giving them an opportunity to provide for the needs of Purim to their local town, and so we're asking questions on that.
I thought it was the other way, that the reason that it's market day is because everybody's coming in to hear the Torah on Monday and Thursday.
Well, the reason why we read Monday and Thursday is a separate issue. The reason why we read on a Monday and Thursday is that there shouldn't be 3 days without reading the Torah. There should never be 3 days that go by without reading the Torah. So if you look at it, so you've got Shabbos, you read it, then Sunday, then Monday, you reading the Torah, then you got Tuesday, Wednesday, and the third day is Thursday. So you'll never have 3 days go by without reading the Torah. That's why we read the Torah on Monday and Thursday, but not so much because of it's the market day.
No, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying since they're already coming Monday and Thursday to read the Torah, so they establish those days as the market days.
They're all coming in.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay.
All right, Chebra. Have a wonderful
Thank you
day.
very much, Rabbi. Have a great
Thank
day.
you,
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much, Rabbi. Have a
Everybody.
great day, everybody.
All the best.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Rabbi.